Welcome to the Great Man Within podcast. Every episode is designed to help you discover and live the great man within you. All right, today we are talking about one of the most popular topics of conversation when it comes to men's sexuality, and that is the topic of porn. Specifically, 5 signs that you may be watching too much porn, because one of the most common questions that I get from male listeners and also when I get interviewed on other people's podcasts is, Dominic, how do I know if I'm watching too much porn? How does a guy know if he's watching too much porn? And I was recently asked this question when I went on the Get It Up podcast, which you haven't checked it out yet. You got to go check it out. It's a newer show launched by the guys who run Vault Health. Vault Health is a men's health organization specifically focused on things like hormone treatments or fixing erectile or solutions for erectile dysfunction. They also, I think, had the very first FDA-approved COVID test when the testing started coming out, and they turned their tests around in a really reliable fashion in 3 or 4 days. The reason why I know about this group is because Dr. Miles Spar, who was a guest on our show right before the pandemic broke out, who's the author of Optimal Men's Health, he is the chief medical officer of Vault Health. He's also a member of the Great Man Mastermind. He ended up joining the mastermind after we interviewed him for the show. And pretty much every guy in our mastermind has gotten the COVID test via Vault. I think it's like $150. I'm not being paid to talk about this. I just figured in case you needed a resource for that and you live in the domestic US. And they were interviewing me just a couple of days ago about all things sex related. And if you've been a listener of this show for a while, you know that a part of my journey has been through Sex Addicts Anonymous. I spent 4 years off of pornography, off of masturbation. I've reintroduced both of those things in much more empowered and healthy ways. And they asked me this question about, how does a guy know if he's watching too much porn? And I don't feel like I really did that question justice. So I'm going to be doing this episode, and I'm also going to be writing up a subsequent blog with 5 signs that you may be watching too much porn. I'm also, at the end of this conversation today, going to give you 3 questions that you can ask your male buddies, your friends, to spur on some deeper conversation about whether they're watching too much porn or how they're feeling about it. What are their best practices? And chances are very few guys have best practices around porn use because most of us are it's the wild, wild west. We haven't really thought intentionally about our porn behaviors and habits, which leads us to these kinds of questions around, am I watching too much? Am I watching the right stuff? Like, should I be doing this? And so this episode is really all about helping you to bring intentionality to your porn use. Now, one more important piece of context setting here is that Brian and I are not adversaries of porn. We are not here to porn shame. There's too much of that goes on in the world today anyway, where you hear people saying that porn is the root of all evil, porn is the devil, porn is the reason why you have erectile dysfunction, porn is the reason why there's no more intimacy in relationships. And I believe a lot of that stuff to be complete BS. Porn can oftentimes be an accelerator of many of these issues, but it's oftentimes the symptom, not the underlying cause. And after having spent 4 years in Sex Addicts Anonymous and watching many men come through those doors with challenges with respect to their porn behaviors and habits, it was the underlying needs that were unmet. It was the underlying insecurities. It was the underlying lack of intentionality that oftentimes led to this egregious porn behavior, secretive porn behavior, shameful porn behavior, inability to connect with a partner. It wasn't the porn itself. And there is absolutely ways to consume porn in an ethical format, porn in a way that feels healthy for you, that it's expansive for you, that can bring novelty and excitement and new ideas into your life. But there's also a way of drifting with porn, right? And that's why I'm going to talk about these 5 signs. Drifting with porn where you end up feeling like maybe you just lost your energy or your mojo, or maybe you feel guilty or shameful after you're done with it, or maybe, you're not really even taking into consideration, am I watching porn that's ethically sourced, or are these women just being used and abused and spit up and chewed out? One of the reasons why I say this is because I have a friend, Lisa Ann, who was one of the top 10 most downloaded porn stars in the world. She still may be right now. She's since retired from the porn game. She was in the industry for 25 years. She sent me a text message just the other day with an article that said, Americans spend $1.14 billion a month on porn. And I remember thinking, wow, I wonder how much that number would be if people actually paid for porn. Because I don't know how many people actually pay for porn. And the fact that Americans are spending $1.14 billion when so many people are just watching porn for free, can you imagine if people are actually paying for it? Now, a few things here. Number one, I know that through my conversation with Lisa Ann, we had her as a guest on the show, I think late last year for a 2-part series. Lisa Ann, backstage with the top 10 porn star. She told us all about the things that the porn industry doesn't want you to know behind the scenes. So how they're creating more and more extreme porn, leading you down that path of you consuming more extreme porn, how there's a monopoly in the porn business where pretty much everything is owned by one entity that's outside of the United States that allows for like mass pirating of porn and why all the aggregators exist. But also how many of the women who are working in the porn industry have very few rights and how are often manipulated, taken advantage of. And, you know, back in the day when I wasn't really thinking about where I bought my clothes or where I would buy my food, I didn't really think about workers' rights or how, you know, the animals were being treated from the food products I bought. When that stuff was exposed, I made different decisions around how I bought organic foods or how I bought sustainably made clothing. And when Lisa Ann shared with me some of the working conditions behind the scenes for many of the women in the porn industry, I got much more intentional around the porn sites that I used. So I want to offer you 2 porn sites that are, I would consider to be ethically sourced, and I'll give you a book as well here, and then we'll get into the 5 signs that you're watching too much porn. Number 1, I've recommended this porn site a couple of times on the show, lustery.com. Lustery.com is basically amateur couples who are consenting to share their sexual journeys, their relationships with one another. And they put this on a site, I think it's like $100 a year for you to be a part of. And I found that there's some pretty sexy couples on there. The porn in many cases is very well shot, artistically done. So if like you're into the real human beings having sex, lustery.com. And then Lisa Ann was the one who sent me the article where I learned about this other company, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly. It's called Bellesa, Bellesa, and I'm going to link that and Lustery in the show notes. Bellesa is a really interesting concept. This is a porn site where they ask the women performers, so these are like real porn stars, women performers, what scenario they'd want to film themselves having sex in, and which actors, or actresses they want to work with. So I thought that was a really cool concept. You talk about feminist porn. These women get to choose not only the scenario, but who they get to act with. And I went through some of the free clips, fellas. It's good shit, okay? So Bellesa and Lustery, I'm going to link those in the show notes. And then the other resource I'll recommend is Dr. David Lay's Ethical Porn for Dicks, A Man's Guide to Responsible Viewing Pleasure. And this is a book written by a man who I've had on the show here before. He's fantastic. He just shoots it straight. I wish that he was my sex addiction therapist when I was going through Sex Addicts Anonymous, back in 2013. And what he talks about is basically what I said in the very beginning. Porn is not the thing we need to vilify, right? Like porn can be a beautiful part of enhancing your sex life if used with intentionality. And here are the ways that you can consume porn ethically in a way that feels good for you. And here are the ways that you're using porn that could lead to secrecy, guilt, shame, unethical behavior. And let's make some very clear delineations between the two. But the bottom line is we just need to be smarter and more intentional around how we use porn. All right, let's get into it. So 5 signs that you may be watching too much porn. Number 1, you fantasize about porn while you're having sex. Now, I certainly know what this is like, right? You're fantasizing, you're having sex with a real life human being, and then maybe without your control, all of a sudden, like you close your eyes and then one of the porn scenes that you watched recently comes into your mind, and like that becomes the predominant thing, not the real life human being in front of you. I know that through running some live events with Brian, where we've had men talk about this stuff too, some guys have said, I can't stay hard without imagining porn while I'm with my partner. I can't get off without imagining a porn scene while with my partner. These are very clear indicators that you're watching too much porn, right? If you cannot continue or you cannot be aroused without that there. And you can also find yourself disengaged during sex, right? Like if you find yourself eyes closed, not making eye contact, going into your own head, into your own mind to go through these scenarios, are often clear indicators that you're watching too much porn. Number 2, when you feel shame or yucky or regretful or a feeling of emptiness after watching porn. Now, when I was on the Get It Up podcast, like I mentioned before, there's 2 doctors on there and then the founder of Vault Health. And I said to the guys, I'm like, hey fellas, do you know that experience when you're done watching porn and you feel that sense of like, like I've just jacked off and I feel like emptiness or regret? And all 3 of the guys are like, well, yeah, of course. It's like such an obvious common occurrence. It's almost like not just a common occurrence, it's almost like the expected occurrence for many of us after we finish watching porn. It's not like a satisfying feeling. It's like a relieving feeling with a tinge of, yucky. And that's not how it's supposed to be. You get it? Like when you're finished with sex, when you're finished with orgasming, the feeling should be good. It should be fulfilling, right? Our sexuality is one of the most powerful, great feeling experiences that like we have been blessed with here in the human experience. We're not supposed to feel bad or empty or icky. So if we're feeling that way, it just gives us an opportunity to ask ourselves, what's up with that? Now, one of the things that I learned in my travels, as I've been speaking openly about porn and sexuality, I was invited last year, maybe a year and a half ago, or 2 years now, I don't even remember, to be on NPR's longest running radio show. If you're not in the United States, NPR is National Public Radio. It's our largest, in the United States, largest nationally syndicated radio show in the country. And their longest running radio show on that channel, all things considered, they did a feature on sexuality for adults. They brought me on, and then they brought like one of the top-notch experts in the country, Emily Nagoski, who's given a number of TED Talks, written a few books, I believe. I know she's given TED Talks, not like TEDx Talks, like TED Talks, to talk about sex and porn and the decisions that we make. And Emily Nagoski was quoted, I don't know if it was in our interview or if it was in the book Boys and Sex, written by Peggy Orenstein, where she said, oftentimes we can feel icky, guilty, and shameful after watching porn because our bodies aren't always reacting to what we're morally in alignment with. Our bodies aren't reacting to what we value. Our bodies are oftentimes reacting to what's sexually relevant. All right, this is like a big concept you need to understand. She's saying that there's some studies where people who believe like rape and incest are morally reprehensible, but are shown videos in a test setting where there are either rape or forced sexual interactions where people have experienced arousal, even when it's appalling to them, because our bodies are responding to sexually relevant situations. It's oftentimes, and I think she's the one who cited this too, where rape survivors can feel that conflicting experience of feeling wetness, arousal, even while they're being forced upon in a sexual scenario they don't want. Similarly, as we are watching porn, we can be watching things that are maybe disgraceful to us, that feel icky to us, but can also be conflated with like this extreme excitement because of the fact that like our bodies are reacting to something that's sexual in nature. Now, here's the issue, fellas. If you continue to go down that path, right, and continue to jerk off to this stuff that makes you feel empty or shameful or guilty or resentful or regretful, then you kind of end up going down that path of conditioning your body chemically to want more of that. So there is an opportunity to interrupt that pattern, to create some like pause and maybe to step back from it, as hard as it may be, difficult as it may be to interrupt that pattern. But just to even bring awareness to that programming right now is super helpful. Sign number 3 is that you need increasingly more extreme porn to get you off. So think about this. Like if you think about the porn that you need today to get you off and compare it to where you were like 3 years ago or 1 year ago or 6 months ago, like has it accelerated quite a bit? Like is it a lot more dramatic now? You know, I remember back in the day, like when I was a kid and I hadn't been exposed to much of anything, all it took was a Victoria's Secret catalog and some privacy, and I was off to the races. And then, of course, as you get older and you have like your own real life sexual experiences, or you come across porn on the internet or on television, then, the floodgates are opened. But if you find yourself now needing some like really extreme, far out there stuff, as compared to not the too distant past, this is probably an indicator that you're watching more and more extreme porn that's leading you down a path that could get in the way of intimacy, could get in the way of feeling good about yourself after you're finished using porn. And this is one of the things that Lisa Ann talks about in those episodes that we did with her, those interviews that we did. The porn industry knows that the way to keep you hooked is to give you more and more extreme porn. So when you go on the aggregators, there's no more kind of like man has sex with woman. It's kind of like stepmother fucks son and his best friend. And then it's like incest porn. And then you're going to throw in crazy scenarios and dungeons and farm animals. Like it just gets more and more extreme. And she walked us down the path of like why that's happening, because you keep coming back for that next crazy iteration. So if you find yourself needing more excessive, extreme scenarios than just in the recent past, that could be a sign that you're watching too much porn. Number 4, real life human bodies just no longer turn you on, right? Like you need a pornified human body. So if you're a heterosexual man, like you need the woman who's got like the plumped out lips, the tiny waist, the big tits, the big ass, and like a real life human being with its imperfections and like real life human bodies no longer get you off. If you're a gay man and you need a guy with a ginormous cock who like otherwise can't satisfy you. Another part of that could also be just like shame you feel about your own body, like not measuring up, like not being, you're not the girthy guy. You're not the guy who can have sex for 75 consecutive minutes and flip your partner upside down and hold them while they're filleting you. It's like, these are probably signs that you're watching too much porn, because I think one of the analogies I gave in a previous episode was like, when I was a kid growing up playing baseball and I was 8 years old, I could look at the major leagues and see Don Mattingly playing baseball, who's my hero. I could see what excellence and greatness looked like. But I also could see what other 8-year-olds in my neighborhood looked like. So I could compare like where I was in reality. When you think about like our sex lives, most of our exposure to sex is what we see in porn and then our own experience. We don't really compare it to all the other average people that are out there like us having sex. So the people that you're watching having sex, these are professionals. These are people who have exceptional bodies in one shape or form or another. And we're comparing ourselves to the 0.001%. And of course, that's oftentimes going to make us feel insecure about our own bodies. But also if we're comparing our partner's bodies and their sexual performance to what we're seeing on screen, then oftentimes like that's a very unfair comparison. So if you find yourself not being able to get aroused by a regular human body, or you feel shameful about your own, that's a sign that you may be watching too much porn. And then finally on this point here, when I took 4 years off of pornography and I started to have sex again with my partner at the time and then women after that, once I ended that relationship, I found that like some of those like micro feelings started to come back, right? Like I've mentioned a number of times, I could smell her specific scent on her skin, right? I would enjoy what like her hair looked like falling across the pillows on the bed. I could feel the electricity of when she would touch me or me touch her. All that stuff was gone when I was watching porn, right? Like it needed to be fucking loud, right? Like everything needed to be loud. Like she needed to be loud. The sex positions needed to be loud. If she was wearing a perfume, the perfume needed to be loud just to get through this, like, you know, it was almost like this armor, this numbness armor that had built around me from too much porn, too much masturbation. Sign number 5 that you're watching too much porn is you just can't stop. Think about it. It's quite simple. If you have made the promise to yourself to stop watching porn and you can't stop, I think that's a pretty clear indicator that you're watching too much porn. If you can't take 48 hours off of watching porn without like having night sweats as a result, if you can't do a 1-week detox off of porn, I think that's a pretty clear indicator that you've built a needy relationship a codependent relationship on porn, and there's something to inspect. You know, one of the things that I joke about is like, I haven't met a man yet who's watching not enough porn. Like I haven't prescribed more porn to someone, to any of the men that have come my way. Maybe there's some guy out there who needs to start watching porn. I don't know who that guy is yet. But I think that most of us, especially if you're listening to this episode, and if you've even ever asked yourself the question, am I watching too much porn? Chances are the answer is yes. If you've wondered the question, chances are the answer is yes. And then the bottom line is for you to maybe take a step back and to ask some different questions about what is your relationship with porn and what do you want it to be. Maybe it'd be helpful here for you to hear how like I introduced porn back into my life after taking 4 years off of it. Now, in Sex Addicts Anonymous, they teach a lot of things like abstinence. So it was when I entered in 2013, they basically said no masturbation, no pornography. And I white knuckled that for 4 years without really having any tools or real guidance on like how to reintroduce this stuff. For 4 years, it was really easy for me to give up porn. That really wasn't a big challenge for me. Masturbation was a thing that was much more challenging. It was almost like a daily thing that I had to overcome and grapple with. But when I reintroduced porn, what I made in terms of a commitment to myself was to say, I don't want to watch porn that makes me feel ashamed about my body. I don't want to watch porn that I feel where women have been disrespected. I don't want to watch porn where I feel icky or gross or unfulfilled after I'm done. I don't want to have regrets after I'm done. So what I do want is I do want the feeling of excitement and titillation and maybe also to have ideas that I can bring back into my sex life. I do want to have an opportunity to connect with my own sexuality when I'm not in a sexual relationship, right? Because I've gone periods of like 8, 9, 10 months without being with a sexual partner, and porn is a really helpful outlet for that. I do want to consume porn that makes me feel good about the working conditions for women. That's why last year I invested the $100 in lustery.com, because it made me feel good that I was paying for porn, supporting these courageous people who went and shared their sexuality with us. And, you know, it's fucking hot. If I'm not really watching that much porn at all these days, maybe like once a month or something like that, I might consider investing in that Bellisa, just because I love the concept of like women picking their partners and their sexual scenarios. It's important for me for when I'm watching porn, for the women in porn to genuinely being enjoying what they are engaging in. That's why most of my porn habits, even before I was conscious of this, was consuming women who weren't porn actresses, but who were amateurs, like sharing their sex lives, because when they were on camera, like their joy, their bliss, their orgasm was real. And I'm not into the faking. Like I'm not into that kind of thing. So that's just me, right? Like you may have your own things. So I'd encourage you to start to intentionally design like your relationship with what you want pornography to be. And a lot of that happened through abstinence periods. I told you I took a 4-year period off, but like you can do something far less extreme than that. 48 hours, take 7 days, take a month off, grab a buddy, Ask him if like he'll be an accountability partner with you, and see if like you can take a specified period of time off just so that you can even feel the discomfort. You can feel those moments where like you want to naturally go down that path, and you can see the triggers in your life that cause you to go there. John O'Connor, who's been a men's coach on the show a number of times, he's my coach for 3 years and Brian's coach, I think, for the past 2. John said, I never really understand why I'm doing something until I stop doing it. And then it can illuminate for me why I was doing that thing to begin with. That's why I'm a big fan of temporary abstinence periods, especially when you feel like maybe you're a bit out of control with, or have a disempowering relationship with a certain behavior, and in this case being porn, to just pause it for a period of time to get more insight. And then finally, I promised you 3 questions that you can ask your male friends to spur on and have a bigger and deeper dialogue around porn use. And I know a number of you guys have reached out to me recently and said, like, during the pandemic, you started your own men's groups, which is fucking awesome. I'm so inspired by the fact that like you're the leaders who are starting your men's groups, and sometimes you're using these episodes to send to your buddies in advance and then using this for like discussion in your men's group meeting. I mean, there's like no higher reward in my book for the work that we're doing here than to know that that's happening in different parts of the world. You listening to these episodes to have, you know, deeper conversations with the guys in your life. So here's 3 questions that I'll equip you with that you can use to have your next men's group discussion. Or if you don't have a men's group, just ask a buddy, you know, like one of your like guys that you trust that you want to have this conversation with. So question number 1, what adjectives would you use to describe your porn habits? What adjectives would you use to describe your porn habits? And then ask the guy to write down a list, or like just like, you know, spew off a list of like 10 to 15. You might hear things like secretive, exciting, shameful, unfulfilling, worrisome, you know, like conflicting, exhausting, numbing. You know, it could be like, just start to write down the adjectives that relate to the like their current day experience with porn use. And if you want to take this question a step further, which I think is really powerful, especially if you're writing it down, then circle the ones that are positive adjectives and then star the ones that are negative, and see what the ratio is, right? Because like this could be a really illuminating exercise to see like, whoa, you know, 80% of the adjectives I use to describe my porn habits are negative. Shit. Like, what can we do to just balance this out a little bit? Because even if I got the 50-50, you know, my relationship would improve dramatically, and then we can worry about taking it to 80-20 the other way in the coming weeks or months. Question number 2 to ask your friends: do you think you could stop watching porn without it being an issue? And if so, for how long? Right? So the first part of that question may just be like an automatic no, right? Do you think you could stop watching porn? And they may say no, right? Like, I need to watch it every single day. But if so, how long without like suffering? And that can illuminate really kind of the amount that you rely upon porn in your life. If you can say, hey, yeah, I could stop cold turkey for 30 days, no problem. Chances are porn isn't really that big of a deal in your life. If you're like, fuck, 24 hours may be hard, then you clearly have brought porn into your life in such a way, in such a depth that's all encompassing, that maybe there's something to inspect deeper there. Okay. And again, I will put these questions in the show notes as well. So the third and final question is, what would a healthy relationship with porn look like for you? What would a healthy relationship with porn look like for you? This is really taking those first 2 questions and then turning it into like an action statement. Let's now design a better future with porn. As I shared with you before, when I took 4 years off of porn and then said, you know what, I want to bring this back into my life, especially during periods of time where I'm not in a sexual, I don't have a sex partner, and I do want sexuality as part of my life. For me, a healthy relationship with porn meant I was watching ethical porn. The women were being treated well. I felt fulfilled and satisfied after I was doing it. I was using it with a frequency that felt healthy and clean to me. I felt like when I was orgasming, that I wasn't draining my life source because it wasn't happening every day, but maybe every couple of weeks, so I could retain the semen and that creative sexual energy for use in creative endeavors, working out, life force, vitality. These were the things when I got really conscious and intentional around it, then that allowed me the freedom to choose and to integrate porn in a really healthy way in my life. So again, this is a conversation for you and the men in your life, and maybe even like your sexual partner, right? Whether it's with another man, with a woman, great episode to potentially listen to together, to have an intentional conversation around porn use in your sex life together as a unit. Or if you're like me right now, rolling solo, just to take this time on your own to do that introspection. Because porn ain't going away, my friends. It's here to stay. And so if we're going to vilify something that is so ubiquitous, I think it's short-sighted. I think there's a beautiful opportunity for us to stop drifting, bring intentionality, to make decisions on our own terms of how we want to bring porn into our lives, so that you can have the sex life you have always dreamed about in a way that feels fulfilling, adventurous, and life-giving. Hey, if you want to listen to a couple extra episodes that we've already done on the topic of porn, I encourage you to go back and listen to the interviews that we did with Elisa Ann backstage with the top 10 porn star. There's 2 episodes there. We don't have our episodes numbered just yet, so I'm sorry. You're going to have to go back and scroll through, but Lisa Ann is the very first name in the podcast title. There's an episode that we did with Dr. David Lay, the author of Ethical Porn for Dicks, A Man's Guide to Responsible Viewing Pleasure. And he talks about why sex addiction is a myth. And then if you want to go back to the very beginning, I think in the first 6 or 7 episodes, there's a couple conversations around pornography. And I also have a few episodes where Brian interviewed me about my journey through sex addiction. And I think those episodes are called The Making of a Sex Addict, parts 1 and 2. And you'll hear about my journey of how my sexuality was something that was guilty, secretive, private, created a private life and a public life that were 2 totally different Dominics, how that came crashing down, and how I ended up on this journey of healing, of integration, of empowering behavior, and then sharing these stories with you fellas. So there's a plenty of resources. You can go back in time and see those conversations around porn, healthy sexuality. And then finally, if this was an episode that was valuable to you and you know that other men in the future who are discovering this podcast for the first time, who need to hear a thoughtful conversation around porn, then please, would you consider going to Apple Podcasts, leave a rating and a review pointing to this particular episode so that the next man can develop a healthy, empowered relationship with porn.